in chaos of a post-nuclear exchange that these biological weapons will be deployed in such a fashion where there will be no structure, no safety nets, for anybody to counter this type of biological onslaught. And it should be mentioned, for those who are not aware, that biological weapons are just as effective as nuclear ones. It just takes a while longer, that's all. Yes. Now, the deployment of the biological weapons following the ceasefire, is that something that happens covertly, like all of a sudden people will start getting ill and no one knows where it came from? Or is this an overt weapon deployment that would be very obvious? I don't think it would be overt, because the Chinese people are going to be hit by the flu. So there'll be a worldwide flu epidemic, perhaps, with a country like China, because China is mentioned being the one that's going to suffer most. Okay. Now, if you were a Chinese military commander, what would you do in this situation? Presumably you would retaliate. Yes, indeed. The type of retaliation the Chinese armed forces could provide is not the same as those that are held in the West. The type of weapons that the West can deploy very quickly far outstrips anything that's within the technological grasp of the Chinese armed forces at the moment, although they're getting better as time goes on. But when I'm talking about China, we're talking about the People's Liberation Army, the People's Army, getting together quite quickly, and you're talking about mass movements of troops somehow into zones where they can engage with the opposite number. And in this type of exchange that's going to be nuclear, that's why I mentioned right at the very beginning there will be a conventional war to begin with, then it will quickly go to nuclear with either Iran or the Chinese being provoked into first use, is because they won't be able to be in a position to defend themselves properly against what the West can deliver conventionally without going nuclear first. Okay. So the Chinese are going to be obliged to go into a preemptive strike. Yes, all their options will be taken away from them, the retaliatory options will be taken away from them quite quickly and they wouldn't have time to recover. Okay, now, what you were describing though is the situation before the ceasefire, when China was going to be provoked into using nuclear weapons. I think it's best to look at this in stages. So we're talking about a conventional war of sorts. That war then eliciting the use of a nuclear weapon either by the Chinese or by the Iranians. Okay. Probably more likely by Iran, to stop it going any further. Then we're talking about an exchange of weapons and then a ceasefire before we have something that's no longer confined to a geographical area. What does that look like? Is this global? For instance, are you talking nuclear weapons on American territory, in Europe, and so forth? No. Global nuclear war wasn't mentioned. Okay. It was just purely geographical, Middle East. Okay. So actually some people would refer to this as the Armageddon War, the war that's been prophesied. Part 1: The Illuminati's Plan for World War III. Warning, this interview is long. Yes. That's right. For those who are looking down those roads, it certainly highlights a time where this sort of thing is going to occur. But probably not the way they thought, because I can't emphasize this too much. People in general are going to be placed into such a state of panic and fear that they're going to wish for a strong government everywhere. They won't call them totalitarian governments. There'll be military governments with the civil government still there but in a redundant mode. The military will call the shots the same way as a general does in Afghanistan, or previously in Iraq. The general in command takes over the scene. He makes the calls. So we have to imagine the same sort of thing within a country where you have got a military-based civil government, calling the shots, with the so-called elected government almost redundant. The military-based government will provide the security for the people who are living in these countries who have yet to be affected by this type of onslaught. Okay. What's the timing for this series of events, as best you know? As best I know, 18 months. It's definitely before 2012. Okay. Or around 2012, sometime in that year. Now somebody reading this will ask, okay, so this is what they were discussing in 2005. How can you know that this plan is still on track, that things haven't changed radically, that they haven't abandoned it completely, that there isn't been some big U-turn or epiphany here? What makes you so certain that this is still on track? Because of the events that have taken place since 2005. I think that's probably the most coherent way to look at it. We've already had a so-called financial collapse. It wasn't a collapse at all. It was a centralization of financial power. That's happened. It's certainly happened in the United States. It's most certainly happened in the United Kingdom. It's most certainly happened in France and in Germany. So all the key players in the Western world centralized their financial assets. Was this talked about in the meeting? Yes. It took up quite a large part of that meeting about how it was going to happen. Bear in mind where the meeting took place in the City of London. The city is the financial hub of the world, beyond any question. Just take on board what I've mentioned, and if it does ring any bells with anyone, the veracity of what's said can then be checked by themselves if they wish to do so. Yes. Not everything's hidden. They can't possibly hide everything, and then they can put the pieces of the puzzle together themselves and then they'll find out that it's quite credible. Yes. I have to admit, it is very credible, which is very sobering. Right at the start of our conversation, you said that this is my paraphrase, you said that this was a race against time from their point of view. Why? There's lots of things going to be happening within the next few years and it's all to do with power. Some of it, I don't fully understand myself, to be honest with you. But from what I do understand, there is quite a lot of power brokering going on, and it's principally that those who have been in control of most of society for not just hundreds of years, but for thousands of years, wish that control to continue. And in order to do that, a sequence of events has to be manufactured in order for that to happen. What I've just described to you is probably the first part. So we're going to head into this war, then after that, and I can't give you a time scale for when this is going to happen. There will be a geophysical event taking place on Earth which is going to affect everybody. Now, by that time we will all have been through a nuclear and biological war. The Earth's population, if this happens, will be drastically reduced. When this geophysical event is going to take place, then those remaining will probably be halved again. And who survives that is going to determine who takes the world and its surviving population into the next era. So we are talking about a post-cataclysmic event era. Who's going to be in charge? Who's going to be in control? So it's all about that. And that's why they're so desperate for these things to happen within a set time frame. Otherwise they'll lose you out. And we can all look back through history. Every war has achieved an aim. Besides the suffering, the human suffering that goes on, it's always achieved an aim. And the aim is always on the side of the victor. So, we're looking at this totalitarian regime, which I believe is already totalitarian anyway. I mean, we do not have a democracy at all. Nobody's got a say. This has already been decided over and above anybody. We don't matter, as it were. We really don't matter. They matter, and their power matters, and that's the only thing that's being thought about it. And I believe if you tapped into the mindset of someone who operates in that type of way, you'd understand what they're going to do and why they're doing it and why they want to control the end game and being power at the end of it, intact, because this geophysical event is going to be survivable. Do you have any indications when this is? This implies, from what you're saying, that they're kind of expecting something to happen in 2012. Is this a 2012 event? No, this isn't really centered around 21st of December, 2012. I don't know what's going to happen on 21st of December, 2012. Do you think that they know when this is happening? Or do you think they think it's just happening sometime? Yes. I think they've got a good idea of when it's going to happen. I don't know when that is.